All right, 7:03. Bill, you think we can probably get started here? We get a
Sure.
couple people coming in. That's more than okay.
Should I share
But
my
yeah,
screen, Danny?
yeah, absolutely. So yeah, welcome to the monthly meeting for Bridge to the Divide. I see a few new faces, which is great to see. But this is where we're coming together for Final Five voting. Um, I hope you all have some understanding of Final Five voting, but essentially what it is a new system of voting that we are promoting to try to get passed in the state of Wisconsin next year. Next slide, Bill.
I'm right there. Just a second, Danny.
Yeah, no problem. So yeah, here's our agenda for tonight. So yeah, just a few minutes here for agenda review and welcome. And then we'll do some breakout rooms and then go over our work in September, give a house party team update, and go over what it's like to host a house party. And then we have a speaker here tonight from Voters First Wisconsin. Kyle Brockman will be talking about the Alaska election that went down in late August. We got the results from Alaska's special House election. And we've been getting a lot of questions about it since it was in the news pretty prominently there for a few weeks. So we figured we would dedicate a decent amount of time to discussing it. So yeah, with that, we will probably get into our breakout rooms here and then come back for talking about our work in September. Bill, do you want to get that set up?
Yeah, I can do that. And just to let you all know, because we're organizers, we believe that relationships are what drive our work. And one of the great things about meetings is the opportunity to meet other people and get to know other people and see why they care about this. You can't do that on Zoom. So we want to just take 5 minutes, send you off into breakout rooms, introduce yourselves, tell your name, where you're from, and tell each other why you're here. And it's just an opportunity to kind of recreate that mingling that happens before or after a meeting. So we're just going to do this for 5 minutes. And again, introduce yourselves and tell each other where you're from and why you're here. Have fun. Welcome back, everybody. It's like there's some smiles on faces, so that's good. I'm going to pass the mic back to Danny.
Yes, absolutely. So I hope your relational time was good, getting to know each other. Like Bill said, we just want people to have a little bit of an opportunity to connect a little bit while we're in Zoom calls, since we think that that's an important part of this. So Bill, if you want to go to the next slide, we'll start going over our strategic goals. So our strategic goal is to build relationships, promote civic engagement, and organize residents to demand that legislators pass Final Five voting in the Wisconsin legislature in 2023 in order to reduce extreme partisanship and divisiveness in politics. So yeah, essentially the goal is to pass Final Five voting, right? That's the long way of saying it, but that is our ultimate goal, is to pass Final Five voting. Bill, you want to take us to the next slide? So this is our geographic scope here. Our project is focused on Assembly Districts 28, 29, 30, and 93. And those are the following counties in Western Wisconsin: Pierce, St. Croix, Dunn, Polk, Eau Claire, and Pepin. So those are the counties that we're focusing on specifically. And these are really all Western Wisconsin counties that we are targeting specifically for our campaign. So recently in Plover, Wisconsin, right outside of Stevens Point, we met up with a handful of other organizations for a Final Five voting statewide meeting. The other organizations there included Voters First Wisconsin, Veterans for Political Innovation, Democracy Found, Georgia's group, Wisconsin United to Amend, was also there. And we, had, I think it was about 25, 30 people there. I don't know if anyone's quick at counting, but all those people in that picture were at that meeting. And keynote speakers included Austin Ramirez, who is the CEO of Husco International, as well as Sarah Eskrich, and they both work with Democracy Found. Austin Ramirez is a founder of Democracy Found, Sarah Eskrich being executive director, as well as Kyle Brockman, who's here with us tonight and will be speaking later, hosted a workshop, as well as Bob and I hosted a workshop. So it was, very fun experience. So for community events this last month, we have attended the Great Community Cookout in Menominee and the City Sampler at UW River Falls, which was just yesterday. Between those two events, we spoke to more than 125 people. And at both events, we held our final 5 voting election on ranking Starburst flavors, which is sort of our go-to election at this point. At the Great Community Cookout, strawberry won like it usually does, but yesterday we actually saw a cherry win for this is the first time something other than strawberry has won. So finally, final 5 voting has given us a winner other than strawberry. But yeah. So do you want to touch on the grassroots school, Bill?
Sure, yeah. Just a heads up for folks is our commitment is to building relationships and developing leaders so we can get the change we need in our area. And one of the ways that we're doing that is by training new people to learn how to organize. So if that is something that you're interested in learning how to organize and some of the skills that we use, we're having a training in the end of January, multiple sessions from January 25th to the 31st. Some of the sessions are going to be on Zoom, but some of the sessions are going to be in person in Menominee. And the training will be taught by me and a woman named Kate Felton Beaton, who is organized with Wisconsin Conservation Voters and Citizen Action, as well as organizers from GROW, like Danny and Jessica Ryan. If you're interested to learn more about that, we have 2 info sessions that you can attend. And we'll kind of give an overview of what this training's all about. And I'm dropping some links to those in the chat if you want to register for one and sign up and see if this training is something that you would like to attend. You can have all your questions answered at one of those sessions. That's all. Did you want me to
Yes,
go
absolutely. I'll hand it over to Bob here. So Bob's going to talk to us about House Party, and then my cat's freaking out in the background. Don't listen to him. But Bob's talking to us about house parties, and he'll be asking Linda a few questions as well.
Thanks, Danny. I like this picture that we've got here, which makes me look much more like a blackjack dealer than an advocate for Final 5 voting. The good thing with Final 5 voting is everybody wins. We had 5 house parties in September. That was really where we started to get ramped up. After a few early house parties, my own, for my neighbors and my colleagues in Bridge the Divide, Linda Vivodi Sadi was, I think, our next house party. So the first one outside the leadership group. And it started to ramp up, very small in July and August. 5 in September. We've got 9 scheduled for October. I bet we'll have 9 or more in November. And as you can imagine, every one of these house parties, there are really 2 ways to win on a house party. If we get a large number of people, and for us, a large number is 20 to 25 people, and they hear our message, even if nobody decides to host a house party, that's a win for us. We get to spread our message to a large number of people. Or if we have a small number of people and 1 or 2 decide to host a house party and we can continue to propagate our message, to grow our message further out, again, that's a win. And many times we score big in both those areas where we're talking to a large number of people and we get a large number of people volunteering to host house parties. I think everyone here is aware our objective is we plug into your networks, we plug into the host networks, and that way there's no way, we're talking to people that we would have no other avenue to talk with. As we set up our October and November house parties, just one example, Carolyn Saunders called me yesterday and we were talking through a house party option that she and Irene are putting together. And one of the people that may be able to attend sits on a county board with a wide variety of other members, many of them conservative. So that would be a real prize to us. I was teasing Carolyn. Once she said that, I said, Carolyn, you've promised me those conservatives are going to show up because that's who we want to talk to. And of course, I was just teasing. She can't promise that, but she is going to pursue that. And that's what we want from all our hosts. Many of the parties we've talked to so far, they are liberal progressives, and we love working with liberal progressives. But we also need to extend to other people, middle of the road or conservatives. And so when we talk to you about hosting a house party, I would urge you to be bold in who you in your network you invite in. We could even have a situation where we have a group of some liberal people and some conservative people, and there could be tension in the air. I can't guarantee anything, but I am so confident that using some of the methods Bill taught me for deep canvassing, even if we had a really entrenched conservative person that came in full of suspicion, we would use techniques to put them at ease, and I'm convinced that we would have a productive meeting. So that's what we'd be looking for when we talk. I don't see the screen anymore. I don't know if it's in front of other people or not.
No, I took it off. I can put it back up if you would like.
Do that for just a bit, Bill.
Absolutely.
And all I want to highlight there is, the people that we've engaged with. So for house parties, 157 attendees so far. It continues to grow. It'll be big in September, October, November, and I'm completely confident that it'll continue to grow after that. And Bill, you can take that down just to leave it on speaker mode. The last thing I do before I introduce Linda, I want to point out an adjacent activity we're doing with this. We are bringing this to our local community ed system. So I've got 3 classes lined up in the Hudson School District where we'll be teaching this at adult community ed. We've got a commitment for 2 classes in River Falls. Linda just told me this morning that we've got another one, and I think it was Ellsworth, no, it's Prescott. Yes, so Linda is helping me work with other school districts, and we just believe that by working through the community ed system, we'll be able to talk to people that we again have no other way to reach. In the second portion of our house party update, I want to invite Linda to first give any initial comments you'd like, and then we'll just have a little conversation. Linda, as I said, other than myself, was our first house party host. Linda, would you like to tell us a little bit about how that experience went for you?
Yeah, I don't think it was. I was the very first party after you. I thought I was waiting a while, so I did mine in early August. So I think we started planning maybe early-ish July, and I really wasn't even quite sure the timeline. And so once you decide to do a house party, Bob is really helpful and basically walks you through it. They've just got all the information. I thought it was actually really easy. I'm not great with planning parties. That's not exactly my thing. I have like book club once a year. So I really was so interested in this. I'm like, I'll do it anyways because I don't love that aspect, but I do like politics and I like teaching people things. So I thought, well, if they can come to my house and it's not just me having to tell them, you know, something, I have an actual event. I thought it went really well. I really, so the timeline and figuring out when to invite people and even the invitation, I just took Bob's invitation and I switched things around. So I thought it was pretty easy.
So Linda, this morning when we were talking, you told me, you said, it was stressful for me, but no more stressful than any other party I host. As you say, this is not your favorite thing to be hosting parties, but I thought the way you did that worked just perfectly well. We met out on Linda's, on her deck. She had snacks for us. We had a comfortable situation. You even invited your kids. Tell me about your daughter. I think she hadn't thought that she was going to be encouraged to stay, but tell me a little bit about her participation.
Yeah, so my daughter is 17. I was more looking at my son. He was 21, and I thought I really wanted youth there. And I had tried to get more of my son's friends, but it didn't work out that way. So he was the one, and then my daughter. And I think if there might have been more people, I don't know if I could have got her to come, but since there's very few people. My numbers just dwindled kind of at the end with COVID. I had a couple of cancellations and that was almost like half my people because I had some families. But so then my daughter did end up sitting outside with us. And as she usually likes to do, she likes to just check something out and then she usually wants to leave. But like I told my husband later, it seemed like however we put her on the deck, she was kind of in the corner. So I don't think she could really leave very easily without drawing a lot of attention to herself. So she didn't leave. So, and then she didn't seem upset either. And she talked out loud, which another thing, probably not her greatest idea of fun. But since everybody was doing it and we were each kind of sharing a little bit about our political like affiliation or what we were interested in, I thought it was done really well that way. And so I thought youth, I think they would be interested. I really want to get more youth to some of those types of gatherings.
Linda, I like the way you described it. I would not have known your daughter was especially shy because she participated as much as anyone else that night.
Right.
You did mention that you had some last minute cancellations and that happens. As we were talking this morning again, in my mind, why was that party was still a success?
Right. Well, I had 3 people. So I had 2 that I knew of. And then actually I got one from Grow, used to be PC Grow. Somebody was in the neighborhood. She actually came from Milwaukee, but she was heading here to talk to Janelle, the executive director. And so she must have asked if there was anything in the area that she could attend as an event. And so she came to my house. So it was kind of a different thing too, to just have a complete stranger. But she was a lovely person. And I thought it was even better because it showed how you don't have to know the people and even the host doesn't have to know the people. So I thought it went well that way.
And in wrapping up, our time is up, but we got 2 other house parties to follow from yours. So 2 people volunteering to host house parties from yours, to me, right there, that makes it a success.
Yeah,
Linda,
that is really good.
thank you for sharing that tonight, and I'll turn that back to Danny.
Yes, so with that, we are going to introduce Kyle Brockman here from Voters First Wisconsin. And he's going to be speaking on the Alaska election, which I'm sure many of you have been wondering about in the last few weeks. So welcome, Kyle Brockman.
All right. I'm going to take control of the screen here. All right. Is this visible?
Yes.
All right. So Danny reached out and mentioned that a lot of you guys have been getting questions about the results in Alaska. For a quick recap, Representative Don Young held this seat for decades and decades and passed away, and so there was a special election to fill it. So this seat will go up, just like every House seat in America, for election in November. But we kind of already had a preview because we had a special election to technically fill it just for a couple months, almost like a practice run, if you will. So it was, in other words, a great opportunity for Alaska to have this one race that was like a trial run of the system, just to kind of get everybody used to it, even though we're going to do the same thing again next month. So the primary had a lot of candidates. It was actually very reassuring. You're generally going to see a lot of candidates hop on a race when someone passes away unexpectedly, because there's not someone who's lined up, kind of like ready to take it with the blessings of a political party. Here we had a lot of people throwing their hat in, even more than usual in a situation like this, because the final four, Alaska did 4 instead of 5, set up kind of gave more people hope that they might, even if they don't get elected, at least have their voice heard. So we had a ton of people, both Democrats, independents, and Republicans, all competing in this nonpartisan primary. As you can see here, Sarah Palin, Nicholas Begich, Al Gross, and Mary Peltola won the top 4. Tara Sweeney, another Republican, almost made it. In a final 5 system, she would have been the 5th person. A lot of people, there was a lot of press about the kind of like, almost like a joke independent candidate, Santa Claus, ran. And unfortunately, Santa Claus made 6. So even in the Wisconsin final 5 proposal, he wouldn't have made the cutoff. Now, immediately after results, Al Gross decided to drop out, even though he had got a slot in the final 4. He endorsed Peltola and Tara Sweeney and petitioned to have Tara Sweeney take his place in the top 4. After all, she was in the top 5. Unfortunately for Sweeney, the Supreme Court of Alaska said that this was not acceptable and that the race would continue with just the 3 of Palin, Begich, and Al Gross. As we went into the general election, there was a set of endorsements. Al Gross had already endorsed Peltola. Santa Claus also joined him, as well as almost every Democrat that originally ran. A few of the Republicans, most notably John Coghill, as well as 14 state senators, all supported Begich. Palin didn't really have much initial support, but then Donald Trump stepped in and supported her, and that kind of made a bit of a splash in the swimming pool, if you will. So this is what the results look like after election night for the first preference votes, just the first rank votes. So we had 42% for Peltola, 28.5% for Begich, and 31.3% for Palin. So only about 40% for the Democrat, but the Republicans were heavily divided. In particular, the independent vote, which predominantly went for Begich, really skewed away from either Peltola or Palin. In fact, we can see this very clearly when we drill down into what was everyone's second choice. So, as you might expect, almost every Peltola voter had their second choice as Begich, and almost every Palin voter had their second choice for Begich. The independent Begich voters were actually pretty evenly split. A slight majority preferred Palin as their second choice, but almost as many, about more than 30%, supported Peltola, and about another third refused to vote either. They insisted, even though there's no downside to declaring your second vote, they were so insistent, they were so anti-Palin and anti-Peltola that they said, I would refuse to vote, full stop. So However, the second choices for Portola and Palin, that's really just trivia left for the wayside in history, because they made it to the second round. So we never really care what their second choice was, other than just for political science trivia. As Begich is eliminated, we get to still respect those second choices of his voters and see what happens to Portola and Palin's support. He's got a little bit more Palin support, but will that be enough to close the gap? Because it's already a 9-point lead. Portola would have won by 9 points under our existing voting system. But let's see what happens on the final 4. Well, with those second choice votes, it really narrows the gap once everyone's vote is counted, but it's not quite enough. That gap goes from a 9-point lead for Portola to a 3-point lead. So Palin gets really boosted, but not quite enough to pull the win out here. She gained 6 points. That's really the big takeaway here. Massive boost in her performance versus the normal status quo system, where she would have lost in a landslide. So I'm going to pull up a fancy pants simulation. Now, at this point, we are way off the beaten path into fun academic territory. The results are very simple. Portola was winning by 9 points, and after the runoff, it was narrowed to just 3. That's the end of the story. If you guys want some extra credit, though, if you're just like a math nerd like me and you really want to dig into what's happening, as well as like all the what ifs. So this is a voting simulator. And this spread of voter preferences, it sort of matches the highly polarized lay of the land of the Alaska electorate. What's interesting is that most of the time when we talk about polarization, we talk about Republican versus Democrat, but for the most part, there isn't as much polarization in the electorate itself as one might expect. But in this case, the exception kind of proves the rule, because there is a lot of polarization. The thing is, people in Alaska didn't necessarily exhibit polarization along a Republican-Democrat axis, but on a not Palin axis. That's really the separation we saw here. So generally speaking, we had kind of like voters who were hardcore anti-Palin and voters who found Palin to be acceptable. So in this, candidate A is Portola, B is Begich, and C is Palin. And we can see that Portola actually wins the majority of voting methods one could do, including the traditional plurality method, runoffs, and even like approval voting. Portola wins every single common voting system used. Now, technically, if we were to just look at the head-to-heads, we already know that Portola beats Palin head-to-head, because we did that. That's literally what happened. She won by 3 points. However, if Begich run against Portola and it was just those two head-to-head, Begich would actually win as the more moderate candidate. Like, this isn't speculation. This is literally just the hard data that we have from the voters. He wins by about 5 points. Similarly, if it was just him against Palin, he would actually win by about 13 points. It would just be a complete landslide. But so in other words, the kind of like deeper question here, it's just funny that everyone is asking, oh, well, you know, why did Palin lose? When the actual question is, why did Begich lose? Palin loses no matter what. But the truth is, for most simple election systems, either currently in use in the US or worldwide, or in the US, Portola wins. We don't go to what we call the Condorcet winner of Begich. Portola wins in whether it's plurality, traditional runoff, like in Georgia, an instant runoff, like in all the states doing it now, and like what we're proposing here, approval, like Fargo, approval runoff, like St. Louis, even like Star that the people in Seattle are proposing. Portola wins every single one of these systems. Begich can win in the comparison-based methods that are like more sophisticated that really no one is actually proposing at the moment. And Palin wins in, well, nothing. But the runoff does make it much closer because again, she gained 6 points. All right. Sorry if that was a big fire hose of information. I kind of gave you the extra credit. But hopefully that's everything you ever wanted to know about this race in Alaska.
Yes, thank you, Kyle. So we're going to open the floor for questions. This has obviously been the biggest piece of news in a Final Four or Final Five voting system has seen yet. So if anyone has any questions for Kyle or just generally about Alaska or Final Five voting, the floor is open.
Kyle, this is Bob. Did you have to do anything special to get the data on people's second, third, fourth choices, et cetera? That is to see all the ballot information, or was that readily available on Alaska's election
Yes,
website?
Alaska released the information. Now,
Okay.
in a lot of ranked choice elections, like that have traditionally been done like San Francisco or New York, where there's 20 candidates running, they cannot release that data because it would be a privacy violation. You would be able to look at the votes and there would be a variety of like unique ballots. In other words, if there's 20 candidates, your specific vote of this person first, this person second, well, it's combinatorically explosive in terms of the number of possible ballots, so it's personally identifying. In other words, the example I would give is if your dad was one of the 20 candidates and your family was the only one who put him first, then in the vote records that would expose who you voted for. So they can't release that data normally. But in the, say, Final Four, Final Five, where there's a reasonable number of candidates, those ballots are no longer personally identifiable. So Alaska is able to just say, hey, here it is, here's all the data.
Thank
It
you.
makes it very transparent without
Good.
these risk of privacy violations.
Hey, Kyle.
Mhm.
I've heard some rumblings, but I'm curious what you've heard about how these results affect the optics of Final Five relative to our work in trying to build support
Mhm.
in Wisconsin. Because here we have a case where a Democrat won in a very traditionally red district, and I know that's raising some hackles among some in Wisconsin. Just curious what you're hearing about possible headwinds.
Well, it's a little all over the place. There's certainly a narrative. The Palin campaign, even though they benefited immensely from this, kind of obviously even, or putting a lot of blame on Final Five as the reason they lost, because they just need a narrative. They need an excuse. We don't really have any polling data on how this affects the narrative. How this affects people's perceptions, whether they're going to kind of like catch on that this helped Palin versus hurt her. I think everyone is waiting to see what happens in November, because again, we're going take two this time for all the marbles here in just a couple weeks. One thing that Sarah Eskridge pointed out the other day was people have been commenting, oh, this is a long-time red district. Well, it's a long-time Don Young district. It's been one guy who's held this seat for several decades. It's kind of dubious to say, oh, it's been Republican for decades. Well, I mean, I guess in the sense that the one guy was a Republican. But what we're really seeing here with all the budget support, this is a district with almost 1/3 independent voters. And they supported Don Young for decades, and now it seems like they're at the very least skeptical on Palin specifically. Bedrich's strong showing and the fact that he would have beat out a win against Portola if it was just him versus Portola does suggest that a sufficiently strong Republican could win the seat, like one might expect in Alaska, but not Palin. She's just has too much baggage. There was also
60% disapproval. Is that about accurate? I've heard
Yeah.
that number. Yeah.
There was also a startling shortage of endorsements for Palin. Almost no one from within the state itself endorsed her. Most of the Republican endorsements went to Bedrich.
So Kyle, this is Carolyn. This is a guess. It's a silly question, but they have an election coming up now in the fall.
Mhm.
Same people. What do you think is going to happen? Because we know in Wisconsin that special elections are often not well supported.
Well,
and-
I'm glad you mentioned that, Carolyn. This special election was unique because, and I'm not sure what process they had in Alaska that made this decision, but it was very convenient for them. They held the special election on the day of the primary, so the turnout was very high. Very unusual situation.
I forgot that. Thank you so much for reminding me. Yes, thank you.
More questions about
I have a
Alaska?
question.
Yep,
Mhm.
absolutely.
I read a few articles after the fact, after I went to the meeting in Stevens Point, and it seemed like in the conservative media, the main narrative and like the main headline was Republicans win 60% of the vote, or 60% of the first round vote,
Mhm.
but they lost the election, right? And that, like, off of this graph, we can, and as people that know about this, we understand that that's the system working the way that it's supposed to, with the exhausted ballots and the second choice votes and everything like that. But how do you like effectively communicate that, like that headline that's like really really impactful
Right.
in a good way?
And I think this specific visual and this sort of I guess narrative is what explains it. That 60% is including this. Can you guys see my mouse? Yeah. That 60% is including all these independent voters who were decidedly anti-Palin. So we don't get to like double count those voters. Yes, they were willing to vote for a Republican candidate.
Mhm.
The overwhelming majority of Bedrich voters refused under any circumstances to vote for Palin. Many voting for the Democrats, some voting for no one. Now, one thing that in political science and campaign strategy circles, what people are talking about is Palin was very adversarial to Bedrich and Bedrich supporters during the campaign. It was actually kind of strange. She played nice with Portola, but not Bedrich. It was pretty nasty between the two of them, and it kind of shows in the second support category. There was for two Republican candidates who ostensibly have very similar platforms, because Bedrich isn't that especially moderate. Those supporters refused to give that much second choice support to each other. Normally, we would expect Palin voters to be like 80 or 90% second choice for Bedrich, and for Bedrich, to be mostly support Palin. But it was very negative between the two. That's why I said that as it played out, it didn't seem like voters were polarized along a Democrat-Republican axis, but on a Palin versus not Palin axis. That's what explains the sharp division between these two voters, even though the platforms and positions are pretty dang similar.
Kyle, do you mind if I make a comment? I'd be lying if I said it's a question, but I want to cheat and use some of your time to make a comment on this one.
Go ahead, Bob.
Thank you. So I heard, maybe an article was brought to my attention, and they talked about whether Begich he's awfully conservative, but still you'd say he's in the middle between these two. So someone said, isn't this a failure of what Final 5 or Final 4 proponents say that you would gravitate toward the middle. And for me, I say it's about incentives. If we look at this election, so we can see what happened. Many of those Republicans may be disappointed that the Democrat Peltola won. And we've got another election coming up in a month. Maybe these exact same numbers would happen and Begich still won't win. I don't know. But this is what I would ask people. What do you think those Republicans will do if they lose election after election after election? Would they continue to advocate for the most extreme candidate they can get their hands on? Or would they start to yield to those incentives and start to look for candidates that might have a little more, be still conservative, but moderately conservative, and try to attract more statewide votes? So we talk about how Final Five voting changes the incentives for politicians. I believe it also changes the incentives for voters. And Republicans, I think, will learn from this, and they may choose to throw their support behind different candidates to try to win votes. And if you have any comments, please throw them out there.
No, I think that's right, Bob. I think there's really three effects here. One is that just in the primary where we had all these candidates running, the nonpartisan primary there'll be a lot louder dialogue about ideas and the nature of what it meant to support this particular district in Alaska. So right off the bat, I think the primary did its job and had a more productive and more democratically interesting discourse. So that was kind of like the promise one of Final Five, in this case Final Four, checked off successfully. The second case might be that, as you say, over time, the candidates might respond to the incentives and change and moderate themselves. For example, I don't think it's going to happen just because of the nature of the Palin campaign. But if Palin course corrected and started playing nice with the Begich supporters and started bridging that divide, if you will, if Palin got even a small fraction of additional Begich voters, it would easily be enough to overcome this 3-point gap. Under a plurality system, she wouldn't have a chance. She's losing by 9 points. But with an instant runoff, it's within reach for her. If she can just overcome the reasons people are hung up on not trusting her, it's possible. And it's kind of painful that I personally don't think it's going to happen, but that's speaking entirely just me as a random pundit who is not an expert in Alaska at all. I just do the math. The last point you mentioned was kind of like the first thing you said, is this failing to live up to the full promise that the middle got squeezed out between the two. And this is a real concern. This is like the one weakness of a runoff-based system. To go back to the simulator, that if you have a moderate candidate in a sufficiently polarized environment, no matter how it's set up, even though the center candidate should technically win, would be mathematically what we say is the Condorcet winner, who is supported over any other candidate, they get eliminated early in a runoff based on the order we do. And this is a flaw in the system. It's not ideal, but and this comes up a lot in academic discussions. If people say, oh, well, if this system can still fail some of the time, does that mean it's worth doing it all? Should we go to some more complex system? But reforms are normally done incrementally by what you can explain to people easily, what we already have infrastructure to do. A instant runoff-based system like Final Four and Final Five, we have the voting technology in our machines and in our protocols that local elections officials already use in Maine, in Alaska, in Utah, in Minneapolis. The fact that those infrastructure is already built out means that this is something we can do today. We don't have to wait for some even better system that fails even less of the time. And we can quantify how much better or how much more rare this will fail to support a rightful centrist candidate versus the other systems. For example, if we run a simulation here, we can see that our current system fails about 10 to 12% of the time to accurately capture a winning centrist candidate, while a instant runoff only fails about 4% of the time. So it's a massive increase, even if it's still possible, for such a failure, a single squeeze, if you will, to occur. Alexi has a question.
Yeah, thanks. Actually, a question and a comment, but I'll do the question first. You mentioned that Sarah Palin's campaign acted antagonistically towards the Begich campaign.
Yeah, and everyone was kind of scratching their head at this because it was just like backwards for what you should do under this new system.
Right. So I have some experience with ranked choice campaigns over a number of years. And one of the things that I've observed is that it's actually quite common for both campaigns and voters to do things that are just dumb in this setting. For various reasons. The most common one that I see being shown prominently right now in that gray wedge from the Begich supporters, there is no reason under any circumstances whatsoever to not fill out your ballot. It is never a good play. But people will do it all the time, right up to, in the last election that I was involved in had 40 candidates. You could vote for 10 and people were still voting for 1 or 2, sometimes 3. And, you had people who voted the full 10 that they could, but it was probably a minority who actually filled out their ballots. How much of the supposed weirdness that we're seeing here would you say is attributable to just voters and the Palin campaign not getting it yet?
I mean, it's very speculatory of if Palin played nice and was just a lot more like she could have gotten another 3% out of this wedge in theory. Like that is a totally mathematically plausible thing to do. I think it would have certainly been closer if she had pursued that. That said, I feel like a lot of these Begich voters had their minds made up on Palin. I think a non-trivial amount of this gray wedge who refused to vote were anti-Palin voters who just refused to vote for a Democrat on principle as well. So it's hard to know how much was that versus how much was potentially Palin voters who were just unconverted and turned off by her adversarial campaign ads. It's hard to know how that breaks down.
And we might find out more in November.
We will, yeah.
We'll run this back again. So yeah.
Especially if we see in the final stretch any change in the ads. I haven't heard that there's been any meaningful change yet, other than both Begich and Palin calling for the other to drop out, and clearly not doing that.
Yeah.
Of course, if Begich drops out, nothing really happens. We just go back to this result. Unless a lot of voters, change their minds, which they could do, but that would just be voters changing their minds rather than some strategic difference in outcomes.
Yeah, and I think it's worth saying too, like Don Young was a popular representative in his state, but even he had races in the last, several years where it was close, like it was within a few percentage points of
Honestly,
him being out. So
Yeah, like this isn't exactly accurate or fail, but to answer the kind of like, oh, this was a, 60% people voted Republicans. This was a Republican seat for ages. It would kind of be like if Joe Manchin retired and the Democrats are like, how did a Republican win this seat? Joe Manchin had this seat. It was a Democrat seat for decades. And it's like, well, come on.
Yeah, I had a comment as well, and it relates to this actually, which is, people can say that those were Republican votes because they had their first slot Republican, but they weren't Republican votes.
Right.
In fact, the Begich gray and blue wedges, those voters indicated extraordinarily clearly that while they were Begich voters, they were not votes that the Republicans own.
These were
and-
anti-Palin votes. This entire election is Palin versus anti-Palin. That's just what we see in the data.
I mean, I don't know that if I would necessarily go that far. That may be supported in the data, but what that, that middle circle is Begich's votes, and where they go from there is up to them. That said, I think this came up earlier. Like, I would think of Begich here as the one with the smallest base, as like a third party candidate. And what we saw is that the introduction of the third party candidate did not result in his victory, but also didn't spoil what would otherwise have been the outcome. So I know that there is sometimes talk about final five or ranked choice voting in general resulting in centrists, but this was a case where the centrists didn't have a base. And so we shouldn't be enormously surprised that the centrists didn't win coming in without a base.
I'm glad you mentioned the centrist bias, because it turns out if you look at actually any voting method, the bias towards centrist candidates, I'm sorry if this is literally or metaphorically impossible to read, there's actually no voting method that's really been proposed or in use that actually has a centrist bias, full stop. Rather, we see that better methods tend to be less volatile, and that has a really faint centrist bias if you describe it poorly, insofar as a more volatile method could randomly, by accident, give you an extremist winner who doesn't actually deserve to win. But generally speaking, there really isn't a what could be honestly described as a centrist bias towards really any method.
Yes, any other questions? We're at about 8 o'clock, so we'll start wrapping up here, but I have time for probably one more question, then we'll get into some takeaways. Any takers? Okay, how about any takeaways from this presentation on Alaska? Anything we learned or we didn't know beforehand that now we have a clearer idea on? I think it was very informative. But yeah, anyone want to share any takeaways? He's giving us one of the takeaways here.
This is the biggest takeaway. 6 points.
Yeah, it really puts things into perspective, for sure. But yeah, thank you, Kyle, for speaking on Alaska today. I think it really clarified things for a lot of people, since this has been such a big news piece, especially when it comes to Final Four or Final Five voting. So thank you, Kyle. And I will wish you all a good day. If you have any interest in applying to our grassroots school, be sure to click on that link that Bill dropped in the chat. And yeah, if you have any questions, there are also those listening sessions. So yeah, thank you everyone for coming.